Hello, my name is Holly. I'm a manager here at Edison Ford Winter States. Each month I do a topic of historic interest, United States history, and this month it's on Alexander Hamilton. And if you look closely at your $10 bill, you'll see that he's on there. Now, for a while, there was some talk of getting rid of him on the dollar bill, perhaps having a woman, which I think it would be great to have a woman on a piece of currency. But ever since the musical Hamilton came out, the talk about taking him off the $10 bill seems to have subsided. So I guess we'll have to wait and see. And there's a lot of information on Alexander Hamilton, so I'm just going to do enough to whet your appetite so you can do more research. There's lots of books out there, websites. Of course, it was a long time ago and there's conflicting stories, so I picked the one that has the most evidence. But history is fluid and new evidence and history gets uncovered all the time, so things can change. Did I do this because of the musical Hamilton? Partially. Yes, I'm a big fan, though I have to tell you, if you want to see it or hear it, read the lyrics first so that you know what they're saying, because a lot of it's hip hop and sometimes people have a hard time following along. But that's just a little overview. But when I was a child, I was very interested in history, and the story of Hamilton and Burr intrigued me. So that's the other reason. Hamilton was born on the island of Nevis in the British West Indies in 1755 or 1757. So we don't even have that correct. When he was born, his mother, Rachel, was married to John Levine, a much older Danish or German merchant who'd settled on the Isle of St. Croix in the Danish West Indies. She was pressured to marry him by her parents when she was still a teen, and they had a son, Peter, together. Oh, and I forgot to mention that I'm in front of the Grange, which is Hamilton's home for the last couple of years of his life in New York City. Hamilton's parents were Rachel, a daughter of a French Huguenot physician, and James Hamilton, a Scottish trader. Levine, or Lavin, I should say, was abusive to Rachel, and she spent almost all the money she had inherited from her when her father died in 1745, because women didn't have control over their funds. Their husbands or their fathers did. He even had her jailed for adultery under Danish law. When she was released, Rachel fled the difficult marriage. He was way older than her, and moved to St. Kitts. It was there that she met James Hamilton, with whom she had another son, James, who was born in 1753. And then, of course, she has Alexander. So after moving to St. Croix, James Sr. abandoned the family when Hamilton was just a boy. And that's a picture of him. There's no actual photographs, a painting or a drawing done of him, leaving Rachel and her sons in poverty. John Adams, who was not a big Hamilton fan, would one day refer to Hamilton as the bastard brat of a Scottish peddler. So he didn't really have father figures in his life. Keep that in mind. And determined to improve his life, he got his first job when he was 11, shortly after his father left. But the family soon received a terrible blow. After working tirelessly to make ends meet, his mother contracted yellow fever and died in 1768 when she was 38 years old. I'll just put this out there for you to think of something that Hamilton said that was something not unusual for people to think that. They want the excitement of a war. So he says, I wish there was a war, to Edward Stevens in 1769. Hamilton's intelligence and writing were recognized by his local benefactors on the island, and they created a fund to provide him with a formal education in the North American colonies, what would become the United States colonies. In 1772, Hamilton arrived in New York City. He began preparing for college at Elizabethtown Academy in New Jersey. He later studied at King's College. That's today known as Columbia University. During this period, he was involved in political issues of his time. As a student, he wrote defending the revolutionary cause and was published in local newspapers. He was determined to graduate in 2 or 3 years, and he raced through the curriculum, which included anatomy, Greek, Latin, literature, rhetoric, public speaking, geography, history, philosophy, math, and science. but he never completed his education. He wrote his first political article in 1774 and signed himself a friend to America. In 1775, Hamilton published The Farmer Refuted, a patriotic pamphlet. And after the war broke out in April of 1775, he joined a student militia. And there's a piece of more modern artwork. I try to get everything I can on the public domain. And that was a time when men and women wore powdered wigs. And there he is with General Washington. And in 1776, he was appointed the rank of captain of the New York Provincial Company of Artillery. This company is still in existence as the 1st Battalion, 5th Field Artillery Regiment. It's one of the oldest regular Army units on active duty, and he fought in the battles of Long Island, White Plains, and Trenton. I think a lot of those battles are forgotten today. He also fought in the battles of Brandywine Creek, Germantown, and Princeton. He captured the attention of Commander George Washington. They were very close, and was appointed a lieutenant colonel on George Washington's staff and functioned as his aide de camp. So he's not actually now going into battle. He was. There's another picture of him. For the next 4 years, this is a long war, he devoted his time to writing letters to 8 years, I believe, and to generals and politicians, transmitting Washington's orders to the troops and being a liaison between the American and French officers. He was with the Army during the freezing winter. If you have never read about this, I should do a presentation on it someday. During the winter at Valley Forge, and remained fiercely loyal to Washington during the Conway Cabal. And you'll have to look that up to find out what that's about. But whenever there was any stress or anything controversial, Hamilton always had Washington's back. He was expected to anticipate, understand, and convey Washington's orders to the troops. Besides getting high marks from the general for his performance in the role, Hamilton was disappointed that he was never appointed any rank higher than lieutenant colonel, and that his request for a regiment to command had been ignored. And during this time, Hamilton developed close friendships with other young officers. Gilbert du Motier, Marquis de Lafayette from France, and John Lawrence, his closest friend. And in 1779, Lawrence gained approval from the Continental Congress for his plan. That's what we had for a government before we were free of Great Britain, to recruit a brigade of 3,000 slaves by promising them, 3,000 enslaved people, promising them freedom in return for fighting. The plan was defeated by political opponents in South Carolina. Lawrence was killed in the Battle of Combahee River in August 1782, and that devastated Hamilton. They were close. They were like brothers. In 1781, tired of his desk job, Hamilton convinced Washington to let him return to the battlefield. Hamilton led a successful charge against the British in the Battle of Yorktown, and that was there were a lot of battles that we lost, but that's one we succeeded at. He contributed heavily to winning the battle, which effectively ended the Revolutionary War. And because of his actions, he was promoted a colonel, an honorary title, and the British surrender after this battle would eventually lead to 2 negotiations in 1783, the Treaty of Paris between the U.S. and Great Britain, and 2 treaties signed at Versailles between France and Britain and Spain. These treaties are part of the peace agreement known as the Peace of Paris, which officially ended the Revolutionary War, though the fighting had already ended. And he was discharged from the army 3 months later. Throughout this time, there were shortages of clothing, shoes, horses' meat, flour, and gunpowder for the Continental Army. And the 13 delegations to the Continental Congress bickered among themselves in their incompetence and pettiness in supplying the army. And this is going to continue all the way up to through the Civil War. Infuriated Hamilton. By the war's end, he believed the country needed a strong central government with power over the states, a strong executive and national army. And this part is pretty much with a few changes from a government article, a national park site. about Hamilton. And I will say that Hamilton viewed the role of the president would be more like a monarchy, which, as you know, George Washington never wanted. But he was not a big proponent of states over the federal government. And here is his wife, Eliza, at 30 years old, and she did not have great hair. And I do know she was a beauty, but she did have a powdered wig. Tastes change over time. 2 years after a brief meeting in Albany, Eliza Schuyler and Hamilton met again at a party given for Washington staff by Eliza's aunt in the winter of 1780 near Morristown, New Jersey. Now, there's other places that say they met other places, but this is where I believe they met. Hamilton was most likely aware of her wealth and connections, which might have played a role in his initial attraction to her. And Eliza was aware of his impoverished background, but she was immediately smitten with him. He was intelligent, he was charming, and they soon began to correspond. And this is her mother and father, and this is the family home that's run by the state. It's in Albany, New York. Eliza, her real name is Elizabeth, was descended from two very prominent early families. She was one of 8 surviving children of Philip Schuyler and Catherine Van Rensselaer. Catherine, known as Kitty, was descended from one of the New York's oldest, richest, and most prominent Dutch families. She was a star on the social scene in Albany before and after her marriage. Catherine Schuyler was a great-great-granddaughter of Kilian Van Rensselaer, the founder of New Netherland, which would become New York. And there's also a town or city in that area called Rensselaer. Philip also came from a prominent family and was a commander of a militia during the French and Indian War. He became a landowner with tens of thousands of acres in the Albany area. He served several times in the Continental Congress and was involved in planning several Revolutionary War battles, including the surprising colonial victory at Saratoga in 1777, the first widespread British defeat. So that tells you how long we had to fight for that to happen, and a turning point of the war. After the war, he was active in both local and national politics. He even served as a U.S. Senator from New York from 1789 to 1791, which shows you that there was a shorter term then as well. Today it's 6 years, and he lost his seat to Aaron Burr. Now, this was something I found in the public domain. I could not find a picture of them getting married, and there's limited pictures, paintings, drawings of them. So I took this from the show. Alexander Hamilton and Elizabeth Schuyler married on December 14th, 1780, at the Schuyler family home, I mispronounced it earlier, in Albany, New York. The romance between Eliza and Alexander moved quickly. Excuse me. A month after meeting, they decided to marry. Eliza was the only sister of the 5 not to elope. The family also had 3 sons who lived to adulthood. Angelica, Eliza, and Peggy were 3 of the 5 sisters who lived to adulthood, along with Cornelia and Catherine. I think Catherine is 25 years younger than Eliza. And you can see they didn't have them wear powdered wigs. Philip Schuyler and his family, like many New Yorkers in the colonial time and the early founding of the U.S., relied on the enslavement, unfortunately, of men, women, and children of African descent as the source of their wealth. When Saratoga was a wilderness, I remember it's also a battlefield, enslaved people were involved in all aspects of building a settlement in the wilderness. They cleared land, harvested trees, planted and harvested crops, fished, tended livestock, cooked, cleaned, served food and drink, and many other tasks. They were also used in his industrial developments. Between the Saratoga estate and the Schuyler mansion in Albany, there were usually 2 to 3 dozen enslaved people. I just want to be completely upfront about that. And this home is their other home, which is actually in the Saratoga National Historic Park, and also where the battlefield area is there as well. And this is the other person, if you've seen the musical, you'll hear a lot about. Eliza's older sister, but not, I think it's only by a year, Angelica. In 1777, when she was 21, she married John Baker Church, a British citizen in North America living under the alias John Carter. And according to Ron Chernow in Alexander Hamilton, the book, rumors claimed Church had changed his name to avoid the aftermath of a duel and to evade creditors. While in America, he became wealthy, dealing arms to the colonists and the French, supporting armies that were fighting against the British. Angelica eloped, everybody's eloping except for Eliza, with him in 1777, and they had 8 children together. Angelica's personal correspondence was with some celebrated people like Jefferson, Hamilton, Washington, and the Marquis de Lafayette. And you can go on to the Library of Congress and find those there and other archives. And Angelica was already married when she met Hamilton and had 2 children. She had 6 more children, too, who died young. For 16 years, she lived abroad with brief visits home. And Chernow wrote in his biography, in his opinion, the attractions between Hamilton and Angelica were so potent and obvious that many people assumed they were lovers. Where Eliza bowed reluctantly to the social demands of Hamilton's career, Angelica applauded his ambitions and was always famished for news of his latest political exploits. Wherever I am, believe always that there's no one can pay a more sincere, affectionate tribute to your deserts than I do, wrote Hamilton to Angelica in December 1787. In that same letter, he expressed, I seldom write to a lady without fancying the relation of lover and mistress. Did they have an affair? Nobody knows, and we probably never will. We know that they loved each other deeply, and they might have shared an attraction. I don't think they did, and I'll tell you why, because she adored her sister, and she would have never betrayed that. Maybe there was some emotional affair, but not a physical one. Angelica died on March 6, 1814 in New York City, 58 years old. And let me mention in the play, they don't mention there's brothers, there's 2 younger sisters, and Angelica is not yet married. So even though that's why it's hard for people to understand why he went with Eliza instead. This is Margarita Peggy Schuyler, who's born in Albany in 1758. She's the 3rd of 8 surviving children. Peggy and her 2 older sisters, Angelica and Eliza, were close in age. I think she's just a year younger, and constant companions and referred to as the Schuyler sisters. She was known to be intelligent, beautiful, witty, and a favorite at dinner tables and balls, and beloved by all the visitors to the Schuyler mansion in Albany. In 1783, she married Stephen Van Rensselaer III, a distant cousin. She was 25 and he was 19, which caused controversy as her parents did not approve of the relationship. He was younger than her. Different times. This resulted in them eloping at her parents' country home in Saratoga. By his 21st birthday, he had taken over his father's substantial New York estate, becoming one of the richest men in the country, and Peggy and Van Rensselaer had 3 children, only one who survived to adulthood. Her letters were less flirtatious than her sister Angelica's, but she also maintained a correspondence with Hamilton and a friendship with him throughout her life. She became ill in 1799 and became worse over the next 2 years. She died on March 14, 1801, at the age of 42. Her brother-in-law, Alexander Hamilton, was in Albany because they lived in New York, also on legal business. Hamilton's letter to Eliza told of her death. On Saturday, my dear Eliza, your sister took leave of her sufferings and friends. I trust to find repose and happiness in a better country. Tragedy. Eliza, here she is. Very few of Eliza's letters survived. She described them, so what we know about her are from other people's impressions. Good-natured and somewhat serious, she was comfortable outdoors and devout in her Christian faith. A letter from Angelica to Eliza stated that she loved Hamilton very much and if you were as generous as the old Romans, you would lend him to me for a little while. I'm hoping that's an Angelica's sense of humor. One of Eliza's few surviving letters says that marriage made her the happiest of women. My dear Hamilton is fonder of me every day. Eliza gave birth to their first child, Philip, in 1782, and 7 more to follow over the next decades. The Hamiltons also raised the orphan daughter of a friend for 10 years. There he is in his powdered wig. After his time in the military, Hamilton returned to New York, where he passed the bar exam. He didn't have to go to law school. Defending a British loyalist in 1784, he helped establish the principle that courts have the right and responsibility to interpret law. Known as judicial review, it remains a cornerstone of the American legal system today. He also became a delegate to the Continental Congress. Those are the people that are planning our future government. In 1784, he established the Bank of New York, the oldest ongoing bank in the United States. A lot of this is going to explain why he's on the $10 bill. 1787, he attended the Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia. And though Hamilton's plan was not adopted, he played a role that was somewhat limited in creating the Constitution. However, he was instrumental in the Constitution's ratification and subsequent interpretation, and justified its ratification with the Federalist Papers of the 85, and that's in the public domain if you want to read them, 85 articles. He wrote 51 over a 6-month period. The other writers were John Jay, I think he only wrote a couple, and James Madison. And James Madison and Hamilton were friends at first, but things changed. And this is a picture of Hamilton in 1792 by John Turnbull from the National Gallery of Art. And I like this painting. I'm sure you can see right in the foreground, there is Franklin. And he is in between Hamilton. That's Hamilton to his left. And there's Madison to his right. You see Washington up there on the podium. And this is a picture from the U.S. Capitol painting. Now, much smaller cabinets than there are today. President George Washington and his cabinet. And there is Washington. Secretary of War, Henry Knox. We don't have that. We have defense now. Secretary of Treasury, Alexander Hamilton. Secretary of State, Thomas Jefferson. And Attorney General Edmund Randolph. Not pictured because he was not technically a part of the cabinet, was Vice President John Adams. In 1789, Washington was unanimously elected as the first president of the United States, and that was in New York. He appointed Hamilton as the first Secretary of the U.S. Treasury, and he did some great things in that role. He believed in the importance of a national banking system and the federal government's assumption of state debts. Hamilton's financial policies faced opposition from his friend Madison and Thomas Jefferson, then Secretary of State, who thought they put too much power in the hands of the federal government. They were more about states' rights. And Jefferson and Hamilton never really got along. But you'll see that his loyalty will be with him as opposed to Burr later on. A believer in a strong central government during his time as Treasury Secretary, Hamilton butted heads with fellow cabinet members who were fearful of a central government holding so much power. I think they were concerned about another monarchy. Hamilton believed the Constitution gave him the authority to create economic policies that strengthened the central government. His proposed fiscal policies began the payment of federal war bonds and had the federal government assume state debts, instituted a federal system for tax collection, and would assist the United States in establishing credit with other nations. Hamilton's views became the basis for the Federalist Party. I believe Washington was a Whig at the time, neither of which exists today. State loyalists were infuriated by Hamilton's suggestions until a compromise was reached during a dinner discussion with Hamilton and Madison on June 20th, 1790. And later on, Madison will become president. Hamilton agreed that a site near the Potomac would be established as the nation's capital in D.C., Washington, D.C., and Madison would no longer block Congress, particularly its Virginia representatives, from approving policies that promoted a more powerful central government over individual states' rights. Hamilton resigned as Secretary of Treasury in 1795 and left behind a more secure U.S. economy to back a strengthened federal government. There's Eliza again. She made sure her children had a religious upbringing and ran the household efficiently, so much so that an associate told Hamilton, "She has much merit as treasurer as you have of treasurer of the wealth of the United States." She was present at the moments when Hamilton began to write the Federalist Papers and composed its defense of a national bank. While in Philadelphia around 1794, Eliza had a miscarriage, perhaps exacerbated by her youngest child falling extremely ill and her worries over Alexander's absence during his armed suppression of the Whiskey Rebellion. Hamilton resigned from public office immediately afterwards and returned to his law practice in New York and remained closer to his family. And I'll have to mention this lady. I also couldn't find a picture of this lady. And she's the one that plays Peggy in the play, but she also plays Hamilton's mistress in the play. So I took that one that was in the public domain. And he made a decision that would culminate in 1791, in the greatest threat to his pride and legacy. He had a year-long affair with a 23-year-old woman named Maria Reynolds. And she showed up at his home telling about the abuse her husband was putting upon her. When Reynolds' husband became aware of the affair, he blackmailed Hamilton almost, well, I don't want to use a bad word, but he almost was selling her services. And he extorted thousands from him. After the relationship ended after a year and James Reynolds was arrested for an unrelated crime, Mr. Reynolds began to tell others that Hamilton was providing him with inside tips about government securities. This was not true, by the way. When a group of congressmen accused Hamilton of corruption, he revealed the truth about the affair by sharing his love letters. But he was not. He made bad decisions, but he didn't do what Reynolds said he did. 1797, Hamilton's letters were published in a pamphlet by journalist James Thompson Callender. In the pages of the pamphlet, he reiterated corruption charges against Hamilton's business dealings. While serving as Treasury Secretary, Hamilton responded with a pamphlet of his own, in which he declared that no financial improprieties occurred. Hamilton also confessed his affair with Maria Reynolds and apologized. While many appreciated Hamilton's honesty, the disclosure of his affair with Reynolds damaged his reputation. It may have even cost him the presidency, which Hamilton felt he deserved. Although Hamilton would rise again, his power would never be as great as it was before the affair. And this is documents of the history of the United States from 1796. Alexander Hamilton is refuting the charges against him when he was Secretary of the Treasury. And this is a entry from a book up here from the Library of Congress documenting the sale. It's in their papers of a woman named Peggy. Biographers have noted that Hamilton helped legal clients and family members buy and sell enslaved people, but they have been less certain on whether he enslaved people himself. There are notations in his cash books and family letters that show he did. It records a payment of $250 to Philip Schuyler in 1796 for 2 Negro servants purchased by him for me. Another entry records him receiving $100 for lending a Negro boy to another person, and an inventory made of Hamilton's property to settle his estate after his death in the duel with Aaron Burr in 1804 includes servants valued at 400 pounds. Servants is just another word for people being enslaved. Biographer Chernow noted Hamilton worked with the Manumission Society, which was against slavery, to abolish slavery in New York and defend free blacks when slave masters from out of state tried to snatch them off New York streets. However, he often acted as a legal arbitrator for others in the transactions of people in bondage. Chernow doesn't believe that he did anything to do with enslavement. I'm thinking he did it for clients. I'm not sure about himself. And maybe as he got older, his views changed, but there was certainly some that happened. This is interesting. This should be his son, Philip, but it's actually his wife, Eliza's, one of her younger brothers. It's been misidentified for years. So I put that there, but it's really not him. Named for his mother's father, the Revolutionary War General Philip Schuyler. Alexander and Eliza's first child was born in 1782 in Albany. Attending boarding school from the age of 9, Philip received letters of encouragement from his father. When Philip contracted a near fatal illness in 1797, Hamilton gave him every dose of medicine. It's very close to him. 3 years later, Philip graduated with honors from Columbia. Remember, his father didn't finish, and went on to study law. On the evening of November 20th, Philip and his friend Richard Price attended a performance of a comedy called The West Indian at Manhattan's Public Theater, Park Theater. There they saw a 27-year-old Republican lawyer named George Eckler. 4 months earlier, Eckler had given a speech suggesting that Alexander Hamilton wanted to use the U.S. Army that he was Inspector General of to overthrow Thomas Jefferson's government. Philip and Richard, who may have been drunk, stormed Eckler's box at the theater and began to insult him, leading to an angry confrontation in the lobby and to Eckler's charge that the two were rascals, though he and Philip had started the argument. Price demanded a duel by letter delivered that night, and Philip soon followed. Now, his father made no effort to dissuade him, but advised Philip to telling him to engage in I'm going to try to say this right, delope, throwing away his first shot. The problem with this is that not everybody agreed to that. Now, effectively, duels were outlawed in 1730, but some states still allowed them to go on. I wish his father had done something a little different. And this is a picture of his son from the play, and that's in the public domain. The duel took place in Paulus, New Jersey, today Jersey City. Eckler faced Philip and Price separately, dueling Price the day after. Neither party was injured, but 4 shots were fired. The next day, November 23rd, 1801, Philip took his father's advice and refused to raise his pistol to fire after he and Eckler each counted 10 paces and faced each other. Eckler, following suit, did not shoot either for the first minute. The men stood doing nothing by refusing to shoot. After a minute, he raised his pistol. Philip did the same. Eckler shot and struck Philip above his right hip. The bullet went through his body and lodged in his arm. He was rushed across the river to the home of his aunt Angelica in Manhattan. She wrote his conduct was extraordinary during this trial. Alexander rushed to the home of Dr. David Hussick. The doctor later reported that Alexander was so much overcome by his anxiety that he fainted and remained some time in my family before he was recovered to proceed to the church home to see his son. Eliza and Hamilton stayed beside Philip through the night. After making a profession of faith, Philip died at 5 a.m., 14 hours after the shooting. Philip was buried on a stormy day. It was reported that Hamilton approached his son's grave. He had to be held up by friends and family due to grief. I just wish they hadn't had duels. Philip's unmarked grave is near the graves of his parents and Aunt Angelica in the churchyard of Trinity Church in New York City. His 17-year-old sister, Angelica Hamilton, named after his aunt, suffered a mental breakdown from which she never recovered. Her mental state deteriorated, so she was only intermittently lucid. She sometimes could not even recognize family members. She spent the rest of her life in a state described as an eternal childhood, often talking to her brother as if he were still alive. After his son's death, Alexander was never the same. This is a copy of the Grange once Hamilton had it, painting of it, had it built. Hamilton commissioned architect John McComb Jr. to design a federal-style country home on a 32-acre estate in Upper Manhattan. This house was completed in 1802 and named the Grange after his father's home in Scotland. The home was in the woods and had 2 streams nearby. The elevation of 200 feet offered Hamilton views of the Hudson River on the west and Harlem and East Rivers on the east. Unfortunately, he only enjoyed his home for 2 years. Although the U.S. Constitution did not provide for political parties in its framework, by John Adams' election in 1796, the 2 parties, the Federalists and the Republicans, or Democratic Republicans, had emerged with opposing ideas on major issues of the day, such as relations with Great Britain and France, and our banking system and financial infrastructure. Each side believed that they defended the true principles of the American Revolution and predicted the nation would fail if the other side won. Rival politicians attacked each other in party newspapers and private correspondence. Character accusations and unfounded accusations were prevalent in the spirit of a venomous exuberance. The Burr-Hamilton rivalry unfolded in the context of this turbulent era and was rooted in the New York State politics. And this is from the Monticello website, and home of Thomas Jefferson. And there's Jefferson and there's Burr. Hamilton was a Federalist. Burr was a Republican. And by the way, Hamilton would have liked to have been president. It didn't work out. And I couldn't figure out that could happen because he wasn't born in the United States. But his island belonged to the British. And when the British, when he moved to the U.S., he's a British citizen, and he's remained in the U.S., he's considered a U.S. citizen, so he could have run for president. Burr and Hamilton fought repeatedly about politics. Their first major disagreement was in 1791 when Burr won a Senate seat from Philip Schuyler. Then Treasury Secretary was counting on Schuyler to support his policies. When Burr won the election, Hamilton seized. This is from the public domain and from the musical Hamilton. It's the pictures. In 1800, Burr attained and published The Public Conduct and Character of John Adams, Esquire, President of the United States, a text very critical of Adams, a Federalist. Written by Hamilton, had been intended for a highly private circulation. Its publication proved it highly embarrassing to Hamilton. It helped widen the rifts in the Federalist Party because Adams was one as well. And Adams is kind of our curmudgeon, by the way. Later that year, when the Republicans, Aaron Boone and Thomas Jefferson, tied in presidential ballots, Hamilton lobbied congressmen to decide the election in Jefferson's favor. And believe me, he was not a fan of Jefferson. Hamilton's campaign had little effect, but in the end, Jefferson emerged the winner. It's Jefferson, then from the play, Burr. Excuse me. It was the New York governor's race, though, that really did things in of 1804 that caused the men to choose violence. Burr turned his back on the Republicans and ran as an independent. Burr believed that if he won, he would regain power. The prospect of Burr leading New York, now he's vice president of the United States right now, but he feels like he has no power, horrified Hamilton, who detested and mistrusted Burr. Hamilton tried to convince New York Federalists not to support Burr. Ultimately, Burr was crushed in the election by the Republican candidate for many reasons, and not because of Hamilton's campaign against him. The battle for governor had been a damaging one because a small slight lead to the Burr-Hamilton duel. In February 1804, the New York Republican Dr. Charles Cooper attended a dinner party at which Alexander Hamilton spoke strongly against Burr. Cooper later wrote a letter to Philip Schuyler in which he referred to a despicable opinion Hamilton expressed about Burr. The letter was published in a New York paper, the Albany Register, hoping that a victory on the dueling grounds could revive his fading political career. Burr challenged Hamilton to a duel. Realized his son has only been dead for 2.5 years or so. Hamilton wanted to avoid the duel, but he felt his career in politics left him no choice. If he admitted Burr's accusations, which were mostly true, he'd lose his honor. If he refused to duel, the result would be the same. Either way, the political career would be over. There's a lot of songs about that. There's one, I'm not throwing away my shot. And this, you'd think that they would learn, but no. They two met on the dueling grounds at Weehawken, New Jersey on July 11th. They each fired a shot from a 56 caliber dueling pistol. Burr was not hit. He really did throw away his shot, but Hamilton fell to the ground mortally wounded and died the next day. Such foolishness. Eliza immersed herself in charitable work. She co-founded the Hamilton Free School in northern Manhattan, close to where the couple had lived, and offered free education to families who could not provide private education for their children. She also became a founder of the Orphan Asylum Society, the city's first private orphanage, and built a Greenwich Village facility that provided a home for hundreds of children. She embarked on a campaign over the years to ensure Hamilton received the honors she was sure he was due. She hired assistants to organize his papers. She wore a little bag around her neck with pieces of a sonnet he composed for her. And people had to fundraise money for her. He was in debt, did not have any money to live off of. They did raise money for a while, but eventually she's going to have to sell the Grange. And she moves to DC in 1848 to live with a daughter. She became a welcome guest at the White House, and she died a few months after her 97th birthday. I believe she lived 50 more years beyond Hamilton. One of the few people that lived a long life in her family. Her siblings did not. There she is at 94. After her husband's death, she stayed for a time in the Grange, the home that is now West 143rd Street, just east of the Amsterdam Avenue in Harlem, where she was surrounded by gardens filled with tulips, hyacinths, and roses. And at the time of his death, he still had a mortgage and owed money. And Eliza now carried the debt. And as I mentioned, her friend's wealthy hand bought the house and property from her for $330,500 and sold it back to her for $15,000, so she'd have money to take care of herself and her family. She became unable to afford the upkeep. In 1813, she was forced to sell it and moved to a simpler home downtown. That place is run by the government, the federal government, a national park site. So there's 3 different places you can visit. One is state, 2 is federal government. Eliza had a strong faith, and Ron Chernow wrote that the religious widow also believed passionately that all children should be literate, to study the Bible. She focused on preserving her husband's and George Washington's legacies. She and her son, John Church Hamilton, reorganized all of his letters, papers, and writings, and made sure that his biography was published. And she worked with Dolly Madison to raise funds for the Washington Monument. It's an amazing woman. She moved to Washington, D.C. in 1848, as I mentioned, to live with her daughter, and she became a guest at the White House. Alexander Hamilton's grave, that's the one in the back, the triangular shape, is located at Trinity Church Cemetery in the Financial District. The church's main entrance is on Broadway, and Hamilton's tomb is on the left side of the churchyard. His wife, Eliza, and their sons are unmarked grave, and Angelica is there. And look at all these pennies. Don't do that. It really damages things and leaves marks. I know it's a sign of remembrance, but it also causes a lot of damage. These are my sources, and there's a heck of a lot more books out there. There is the musical. Just remember, it's since to inspire you to do further research, but there are things that aren't true in there. But it's also drawn a lot of people to that time period in history. So next month, on September 9th, Chase will be doing a presentation on the history of the Henry Ford Hospital in Michigan. And on the 16th, I'm going to do a digital discussion about Emmanuel Gonzalez in honor of Spanish History Month, which goes, I believe, from September 15th to October 15th. Gonzalez was one of our early founders. He is the original founder of Fort Myers, and I know a lot of people that live in Fort Myers are related to him, and I want to talk about him, so I hope you'll join me. Now, does anybody have any questions or comments? Well, if not, oh, okay. Thank you, Maxine. Great info. I hope you'll join me next month. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.